My mother's voice echoed off the courtroom walls like a slap. "She's a total disgrace," Daisy Hollister shouted, pointing straight at me like I was something dirty. "She's unstable. She's sick. She can't be trusted with money. She shouldn't inherit a single dollar." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I kept my hands folded on the table and let the silence do the talking. Because the judge didn't react the way my mother expected. Judge Patricia Kowalczyk leaned forward, just slightly, and stared at Daisy's attorney like she was seeing a crack in a glass she'd been watching too long. Then she asked one quiet question that made the entire room change temperature. "Counselor, are you sure you know who you're calling incompetent?" Bradley Fenwick froze mid-breath. And my mother's face, so confident a second ago, went pale in real time. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next changed everything. And if you stay till the end, you'll understand why the loudest person in the room is often the one who's most terrified of the truth. My name is Nancy Bergland. I'm 33 years old. And the day my mother tried to declare me mentally unfit in open court was not the first time she tried to erase me. It was just the first time she did it with paperwork. I grew up learning that silence can be a weapon, but only if you know when to use it. And I did. I was wearing Dorothy Bergland's pearl earrings that morning, the ones she wore for important days. Graduation, weddings, funerals, days when she wanted the world to know she still had dignity, no matter what life took from her. Dorothy was my grandmother, but she was also my parent in every way that mattered. And the inheritance Daisy Hollister was screaming about in court wasn't some jackpot. It was Dorothy's whole life, carefully saved, carefully tracked, carefully protected, until someone decided she was easy to steal from. The judge's question hung in the air, unanswered, and I'll tell you what I remember most from that moment. It wasn't my mother's anger. It was Bradley's confusion. It was the tiny, involuntary twitch in Theodore Hollister's jaw, like he already knew the end of the story, and he didn't like it. Theodore was Daisy's husband, my stepfather, a man I hadn't seen in almost 2 decades. A man who smiled like a pastor and watched like a hawk. And he was sitting behind my mother, hands folded, wearing concern like it was a tailored suit. Let me back up, because none of this started in a courtroom. It started when I was 14, and my mother decided I was baggage. The divorce happened fast. The kind of divorce where nobody sits you down and explains anything. They just pack boxes and speak in clipped voices and slam doors like punctuation. My father moved across the country. New job, new life, new silence. And my mother, Daisy Hollister. Back then she was Daisy Bergland, remarried within months. The new husband was Theodore. He owned a chain of small laundry shops in our region, nothing glamorous, but enough money to feel important. Enough money for Daisy to pretend she'd moved up. What she didn't have room for in her upgraded life was me. She didn't fight for custody. She didn't ask about school. She didn't show up on birthdays. I got one holiday card the first year. A glossy photo of Daisy and Theodore and a little girl I barely recognized, Merlin Hollister, Theodore's daughter from his first marriage. On the back, Daisy wrote 2 words, "Be good." Then nothing. If Dorothy hadn't stepped in, I don't know where I would have landed. Dorothy Bergland lived in a small, quiet town called Eau Claire, one of those places with wide sidewalks, modest houses, and neighbors who still noticed if your porch light was out. She was a retired elementary school teacher, not rich, not flashy, but disciplined in a way that made her feel untouchable. Dorothy kept receipts in labeled envelopes. Dorothy balanced her checkbook every Sunday morning with a cup of coffee measured like science. Dorothy wrote dates on everything, even birthday cards, even warranty papers for appliances she'd already replaced. As a kid, I used to tease her for it. As an adult, I realized she wasn't obsessive. She was prepared. Dorothy raised me like the world was going to test me, and she wanted me to pass. And somehow, without meaning to, she trained me into what I became. Because by the time I was 33, I was just an accountant, like Bradley Fenwick said. I was a certified fraud examiner. My career was built around one kind of case: financial exploitation of seniors. The quiet thefts that happen behind polite smiles. The missing checks. The sudden new friend who shows up when the family disappears. The forged signatures. The helpful relative who suddenly needs to manage everything. I'd testified as an expert witness dozens of times. And Judge Patricia Kowalczyk had seen me work more than once. Daisy Hollister didn't know that. My mother thought she was walking into court to bulldoze a stranger. She didn't realize she was walking into a room where the judge already knew my voice, my credentials, and my history. And that's why she yelled. Because people who rely on intimidation panic when intimidation stops working. Dorothy died 8 months before the hearing. Congestive heart failure, peaceful, quiet, the way Dorothy would have chosen if she'd gotten a pick. I was holding her hand when it happened. Her last squeeze was so gentle, I almost convinced myself it was my imagination. The week after the funeral, I did what grieving people do. I handled paperwork, answered calls, thanked neighbors, kept moving so I didn't have to sit still long enough to feel the loss. Dorothy's will was clear. She left me the house. She left me her savings. She left me a small life insurance policy that wouldn't impress anyone except someone who understood what it took for a teacher to save it. It wasn't millions. It was security. It was proof that Dorothy's work mattered. And for 3 weeks, I allowed myself to think something dangerous. I thought maybe my mother would stay gone. Then I received a letter from Bradley Fenwick. He wrote like he'd copied the tone from a textbook. Polite, formal, cold. Daisy Hollister was contesting the will. She claimed Dorothy had been mentally declining and confused. She claimed I isolated Dorothy from family. She claimed I manipulated Dorothy into leaving me everything. And then the real knife came out. Daisy's petition didn't just attack the will. It attacked me. She asked the court to declare me mentally incompetent, to appoint a conservator to manage Dorothy's estate in the best interest of the family. And Daisy, of course, volunteered to be that conservator. When I read that part, I actually laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound in my apartment, like my body couldn't decide whether the letter was comedy or trauma. Then I stopped laughing, because attached to the letter were references to documentation of my instability, dating back to my teenage years. Old school counseling notes. A summary of sessions I attended for less than a year after Daisy abandoned me. Notes where a counselor wrote words like low self-worth and abandonment issues. Normal things, human things. But Daisy planned to turn them into a diagnosis. She planned to weaponize the fact that I'd been hurt. And if you've never had your pain used against you, you don't understand how it feels until it happens. It's like being punished twice. Once for being wounded, and again for ever admitting it. That night I called my boyfriend, Cameron Linkfist. Cameron was steady in a way that sometimes made me forget people could be steady. He taught history at a local high school. He had parents who still hosted family dinners. He had a childhood full of photographs where nobody looked like they were faking a smile. When I told him what Daisy filed, he went quiet. Then he said something I'll never forget. Maybe you should just talk to her. Maybe this is her way of coming back. I stared at my kitchen wall like it might answer for me. Because Cameron didn't understand the kind of mother who comes back only when she smells money. He didn't understand that Daisy could forget my birthday for 19 years, but somehow remembered Dorothy's exact account balance down to the dollar. And yes, she listed the number in her petition. That detail alone told me everything. This wasn't family grief. This was a financial plan. And she'd been planning longer than she wanted anyone to know. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated. Daisy didn't just contest the will. She filed an emergency motion to freeze the accounts. She pushed for temporary conservatorship while the case was pending. She wanted the court to treat me like a risk before I ever had a chance to defend myself. And this is the part nobody talks about. You can be innocent and still be damaged. Because once someone files that kind of petition, the rumor becomes a shadow that follows you everywhere. My employer, an investigative consulting firm, put me on administrative review. My boss, Harold, called me into his office like he was delivering bad medical news. He believed me, I could tell he did, but belief doesn't cancel risk. If you're being challenged for mental competency, he said, choosing every word carefully, we can't put you on witness stand right now. It's not personal, it's liability. I nodded. I smiled. I walked out with my dignity intact. Then I sat in my car and felt something inside me go cold. Because Daisy wasn't just after Dorothy's money. She was aiming at my identity, my credibility, the career I'd built from scratch, with no mother cheering for me, no father guiding me, just Dorothy's steady hands and my own stubbornness. Daisy was trying to take my life apart the way she'd done when I was 14. Only this time, she had a lawyer. But that wasn't the worst part. Because around that same time, I noticed something else. Theodore and Daisy were suddenly spending money like people who weren't supposed to be broke. New clothes. A bigger vehicle. Talk around town. Because yes, news travels even in cities about Theodore refinancing his shops. And I knew enough about financial predators to recognize the smell of panic hidden under perfume. So I did what Dorothy trained me to do. I followed the paper. Dorothy had added me as a joint holder on one of her bank accounts 2 years before she died. Just in case, she told me, if my hands get tired, you can help me. At the time, it felt like normal aging preparation. Now, it felt like Dorothy was leaving me a key. I requested statements from the last 2 years. I built a spreadsheet. I categorized every deposit and every bill payment. I mapped patterns like I was working a professional case, because I was. At first, it looked normal. Dorothy's life was predictable. Utilities, groceries, small donations, pharmacy charges, church offerings. Then I found 7 cash withdrawals in less than a year. Not small ones. 4,000, 8,000, 12,000. Always in cash. Always within a couple days of a visit from Daisy. Total, $47,850. My throat tightened as I stared at the numbers, because numbers don't care how badly you want them to be wrong. And something else hit me at the same time. Daisy wasn't coming after Dorothy's inheritance for the first time. She'd been taking it while Dorothy was alive. I didn't sleep that night. I made coffee, then forgot to drink it. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the spreadsheet like it might blink. Because there's a special kind of sickness that comes from realizing the crime isn't theoretical. It's personal. And it was happening in the house, where Dorothy kept me safe. The next weekend, I drove to Eau Claire and entered Dorothy's home like I was stepping into a memory that could still bruise me. Everything still smelled like her: lavender detergent, old books, lemon polish. I moved through her rooms carefully, not because I thought she'd be angry, but because I couldn't bear the idea of disturbing the last physical version of her life. I opened drawers. I checked files. I searched places Dorothy would have considered secure. And I found something I'd forgotten existed. Dorothy's safe deposit box. The key was in the place she always hid important things, inside a small tin labeled buttons, full of buttons nobody would ever use. At the bank, the clerk led me into a quiet room and slid the box onto the table. When I opened it, I expected jewelry and documents. I didn't expect a journal. It was brown leather, worn at the corners like it had been held too tightly. And the first page was dated 14 months before Dorothy died. The first entry nearly broke me. Dorothy wrote that Daisy had called out of nowhere, voice sweet, apologetic. She said she misses me, Dorothy wrote, I want to believe her, but I don't trust how easy the words come. The next entries told a story Dorothy never had the heart to tell me. Daisy visited in late summer and asked for a small loan. Dorothy gave it. Daisy visited again and said Theodore's business was suffering and they needed temporary help. Dorothy gave it. Then came the worst entry of all. Daisy brought papers. She told Dorothy it would make things easier if Dorothy ever got sick. Dorothy wrote that she felt foggy that day, embarrassed by her own mind slipping in and out like a light. She signed. Then, days later, Dorothy had a good day, a clear day. She reread what she signed. And Dorothy realized her daughter had tricked her into signing a power of attorney. A document giving Daisy control. Dorothy wrote, "I feel ashamed. I feel stupid. I don't want Nancy to see me like this." That line made my chest burn. Because Dorothy wasn't stupid. She was trusting. She was tired. And she was being preyed on by the very person who should have protected her. I kept reading. Dorothy documented each visit, each withdrawal, each lie Daisy told. Some entries were short, like Dorothy couldn't bear to relive it. Others were detailed, like she was forcing herself to create the record she knew I would need. Then I reached the last entry. It was addressed to me. "Nancy," she wrote, "if you're reading this, then I didn't find the courage to say it out loud. I'm sorry. I wanted to protect you from the ugliness, but I also wanted to protect you from Daisy. I know what she is when she wants something." I pressed my fingers against the page, like I could touch Dorothy through the ink. Dorothy wrote that she knew Daisy would come for the estate after she died. And she wanted me to have proof. She ended with a sentence that made me cry in the middle of that bank room like I was 14 again. "You were raised on truth, my girl. Don't let anyone rewrite it." When I finally got myself together, I examined the power of attorney more closely. Dorothy's signature looked like hers, shaky but real. But the notarization was wrong. The notary stamp belonged to Ray Gustafson. I recognized the name because I'd seen it once in an old case file from my early training. I looked him up. Ray Gustafson's commission ended years before the document date, meaning someone used an old stamp on a new paper. Sloppy, confident, the kind of fraud committed by people who think nobody will question them. That was when my grief turned into something sharper. Because Daisy hadn't just lied about me. She'd forged legal power to drain Dorothy's money while Dorothy was still alive. And now she was trying to finish the job by making me look crazy. I called Caroline Jankowski the next morning. Caroline was a civil attorney with a prosecutor's spine. Direct, practical, allergic to drama. I didn't hire her because I wanted comfort. I hired her because I wanted results. I told Caroline everything. The withdrawals, the journal, the fake notarization. She listened without interrupting, which is rare for lawyers. When I finished, she said something that made my stomach flip. "This isn't just probate," she said. "This is potential criminal exploitation." Then she asked me what I wanted. Most people would say they wanted peace. Most people would say they wanted it to end. I wanted something else. I wanted Daisy to walk into court thinking she had control. I wanted her to commit to her lies under oath. I wanted her to expose herself so clearly that even she couldn't deny it afterward. And Caroline understood. We played it carefully. Caroline filed a response to the petition that looked boring. No fireworks. No evidence attached. Just denials and a request for hearing. It was a trap disguised as paperwork. Daisy and Bradley read my response and assumed I was weak. Assumed I was scrambling. Assumed I had nothing. And that assumption was the greatest gift they could have handed me. Because while they got comfortable, I built my case. I requested ATM location data. I subpoenaed bank surveillance for the withdrawal days. I pulled Dorothy's phone logs to show Daisy's call pattern. Long silences, Then sudden bursts of attention right before money moved. I contacted Ray Gustafson's former office to verify his notary records. I built a timeline so tight it felt like a chain. And every time I found a new link, I thought, but that wasn't the worst part. Because another pattern started to appear. Theodore Hollister. I started digging into him, the way I dig into any suspect. Not emotionally, methodically. Theodore's first wife had died years ago. His mother, Geraldine Hollister, died later. Both estates had been messy. Both had ended with far less money than expected. No charges were ever filed, but my work taught me something important. Crimes don't always leave sirens. Sometimes they leave inconsistencies. And Theodore's life was full of them. It hit me then. Daisy didn't marry a desperate man. She married a practiced one. Someone who knew how to drain money quietly and let grief cover the tracks. A few weeks before court, Bradley Fenwick scheduled my deposition. Standard procedure, but also strategic. He wanted me on record. He wanted me to slip. He wanted me emotional. So I gave him the version of me he was expecting. I answered in short sentences. I didn't volunteer details. When he asked about my job, I said, I work in accounting. When he asked about my counseling history, I said, I spoke to a school counselor as a teenager. I watched Daisy on the video screen, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to taste victory. And I let her. Because the best revenge isn't loud in the beginning. It's patient. It lets the other person underestimate you until they can't undo it. But that wasn't the worst part. Because 2 weeks before the hearing, Caroline forwarded me a message that made my heart stop. Merlin Hollister wanted to meet me. Merlin was Theodore's daughter, my stepsister in a technical sense. I hadn't spoken to her in 19 years. In Daisy's petition, Merlin had signed a statement calling me unstable, erratic, unfit. Caroline warned me it could be a trap. And it could have been. But something about Merlin's body language in the deposition video stuck with me. When Theodore's name came up, Merlin looked away like she was bracing for consequences. Fear has a tell. So I agreed, on neutral ground in a public place, daytime. Merlin arrived looking like she hadn't slept in years. Thin, hollowed-out eyes, fingernails bitten down. She ordered coffee, then didn't touch it. The first thing she said was, I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. An apology after 19 years is a complicated sound. Merlin swallowed hard and said, my dad wrote that statement. Daisy told me I had to sign it. I didn't know how to say no. I asked her why she was telling me now. She stared at the table for a long time, then said, because this isn't the first time. And then she told me about Geraldine Hollister, Theodore's mother. Geraldine had dementia, real dementia, not mild forgetfulness. Theodore controlled her finances. When she died, her estate was nearly empty. Theodore blamed care costs. Merlin believed him until she got older and started asking questions. She said the numbers didn't add up. She said when she asked her father for receipts, he didn't answer. He didn't yell either. He just got quiet, and that quiet scared her more than shouting. Merlin rolled up her sleeve slightly and touched the inside of her wrist without explaining. I didn't ask. Some truths don't need full sentences. Merlin told me she'd lived under Theodore's control for years, watching Daisy learn from him, watching them turn family emergencies into cash withdrawals. She said when Dorothy got sick, Daisy saw opportunity. And Merlin saw it too. I signed because I didn't want to be their next target, she said, voice shaking. But I can't keep doing this. I told Merlin the truth. If you testify, I said, you're choosing the hard path. They'll hate you for it. Merlin nodded once. They already do. They just pretend they don't. We arranged for Caroline to interview Merlin properly, on record, with protections. And when Merlin left that coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't felt since the petition arrived. Not relief. Not victory. Hope. That night, Cameron came to my apartment with takeout from a small local place we liked, the kind that packed food in plain containers and didn't need a name. He looked nervous, like he'd been rehearsing. "I talked to my parents," he said, "and I realized something. I was listening to their fear instead of listening to you." I didn't soften immediately. Trust doesn't rebuild on demand. So I handed him Dorothy's journal. I handed him the spreadsheet. I showed him the notary discrepancy. I showed him the withdrawal dates. Cameron read in silence, his expression changing slowly, from confusion to anger to something deeper. When he finished, he looked up and said, "Tell me what you need." "I need you in court," I said. "Not to defend me, to witness me." Cameron nodded. "I'm there." The night before the hearing, I drove to Eau Claire again. I didn't go inside Dorothy's house. I parked near the cemetery and sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dark. I thought about how Dorothy taught third graders to read, and still somehow taught me the most important lesson of my life. Paper trails don't lie. People lie. But paper doesn't get emotional. Paper just waits. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. in Lakeview County Court. Fictional name, real consequence. I arrived early, dressed professionally, nothing dramatic. Caroline sat beside me with a case file thick enough to be a weapon. Cameron sat behind us. 2 of my colleagues sat nearby, not because they were required, but because they wanted Daisy to see I wasn't alone. Then Daisy walked in. She was dressed like she'd planned a photo shoot. And she was wearing pearl earrings. Dorothy's pearl earrings. The same ones I wore in the hook of this story. Yes, because Daisy had taken more than money. She'd taken symbols. She'd taken the right to pretend she belonged. Theodore entered right behind her, calm as ever. Bradley Fenwick followed, shuffling papers like he was still trying to convince himself he belonged in the room. Merlin came in last and sat behind Daisy, eyes fixed on her hands. When Judge Patricia Kowalczyk entered, the room stood. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and opened the file. Her eyes moved from Bradley to Daisy to me. And I saw recognition spark, small but unmistakable. Bradley began his opening statement. He painted Daisy as a worried mother. He painted Dorothy as confused and vulnerable. He painted me as manipulative, unstable, mentally unfit. He referenced my counseling notes like they were a lifetime diagnosis. He said the court needed to protect the estate from me. And he made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was nobody. He didn't research beyond the basics. He didn't ask why a woman like me would sit so calmly while being accused. He didn't realize calm is what you look like when you already have the evidence. Then Daisy asked to speak. And she did what Daisy always did when she sensed she might lose control. She escalated. She stood up, pointed at me, and screamed that I was mentally sick, that I'd been unstable my whole life, that Dorothy had been manipulated, that I didn't deserve anything. It was ugly. It was performative. It was designed to provoke me. And I stayed still, because I wanted the judge to see Daisy exactly as she was. Not a caring mother. A person willing to humiliate her own child to win money. Judge Kowalczyk watched Daisy's outburst with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of seeing lies dressed as emotion. When Daisy finally stopped for air, the judge turned to Bradley and asked that quiet question. "Counselor, are you sure you know who you're calling incompetent?" Bradley blinked. "Your Honor, she's an accountant." Judge Kowalczyk held his gaze. "Is that all you think she is?" Bradley looked down at his papers, like the answers might be hiding under ink. Caroline stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," Caroline said, "we'd like to submit evidence that reframes this petition entirely. This is not a daughter exploiting a grandmother. This is a daughter uncovering exploitation." Judge Kowalczyk nodded once. "Proceed." And this is where Daisy's confidence began to die. Slowly, publicly, permanently. Caroline started with the bank records. She walked the court through Dorothy's normal spending pattern. Then she highlighted the 7 cash withdrawals, totaling $47,850. She showed the dates. She showed Daisy's visits. She didn't accuse yet. She just showed the timeline and let the court feel the weight of coincidence stacking into certainty. Bradley tried to object. Judge Kowalczyk overruled. Then Caroline introduced the power of attorney. She held it up like it was a dead thing. She pointed out the notary stamp. She submitted documentation that Ray Gustafson's commission ended years before the date on that paper. In other words, Caroline said calmly, the notarization is invalid and appears fabricated. Daisy's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Theodore didn't move, but his fingers tightened together in his lap. Caroline then introduced Dorothy's journal. She didn't read the entire thing. She chose carefully, enough to establish Dorothy's voice, Dorothy's fear, Dorothy's realization that she'd been tricked. And then she read the last entry addressed to me. The courtroom went quiet in the way rooms do when grief becomes evidence. Cameron shifted behind me, the sound of it tiny but loud in the silence. Judge Kowalczyk looked up from the pages, eyes narrowed. Mrs. Hollister, she said to Daisy, did you obtain a power of attorney from your mother? Daisy's attorney spoke before Daisy could. Your Honor, my client. Judge Kowalczyk raised one hand. I asked your client. Daisy's voice cracked in a way that wasn't sadness. It was panic. I was helping, Daisy said. She needed help. Caroline didn't pounce. She waited. Because the best cross-examinations are built on patience. Then Caroline introduced one more piece. Surveillance stills from the bank. Not perfectly clear, but clear enough. A woman resembling Daisy withdrawing cash on the same days Dorothy's account was drained. And next to those stills, Caroline placed Dorothy's journal entry describing Daisy's visit and the pressure to sign papers. Daisy's face twisted, not into shame but anger. Anger that her mask had been ripped off in front of strangers. Then Caroline did something Daisy didn't see coming. She called Merlin Hollister. Merlin stood slowly, like every step weighed 1,000 pounds. Bradley's head snapped toward her. Merlin. Judge Kowalczyk cut him off. She will testify if called. Merlin took the oath. Her voice shook at first, then steadied the longer she spoke, like truth was something she'd been holding back so long it felt strange to let it out. She admitted her statement against me was coerced. She admitted Theodore wrote it. She admitted Daisy pushed her. Then she told the court about Geraldine Hollister's estate, about the missing money, about Theodore's control, about patterns that looked too familiar to be accidents. Theodore's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened, like a door locking. Bradley asked for a recess. Judge Kowalczyk granted 5 minutes. In that break, Bradley leaned close to Daisy and whispered. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched Daisy's face collapse, as if the whisper contained a name she recognized. A reputation. A history she hadn't bothered to learn. He was telling her who I really was. That I had testified in this judge's courtroom before. That my career was literally built on exposing the exact crime Daisy was committing. That the judge wasn't meeting me today. The judge already knew me. When court resumed, Bradley stood and said, Your Honor, the petitioner wishes to withdraw the petition. Daisy nodded quickly, too quickly, as if retreat could erase what she'd already said on record. Judge Kowalczyk didn't nod back. No, she said simply. And the word landed like a gavel before the gavel. Judge Kowalczyk looked through the evidence again, then spoke in a tone that wasn't dramatic, just final. This court is denying the petition with prejudice. The claims of incompetency appear retaliatory and unsupported. Daisy's shoulders dropped. Judge Kowalczyk continued. Based on the evidence presented, the court will also refer this matter to the appropriate Financial Crimes Unit for review of potential criminal exploitation and forged notarization. Daisy gasped like she was the victim. Theodore stared forward, face unreadable. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Because justice isn't fireworks. It's structure. It's consequences. It's a system working the way it was designed to work, when you bring it the truth. The hearing ended in under 2 hours. And when we walked out, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because Daisy failed. Heavier because Dorothy should never have had to write her fear into a journal just to be believed. But that wasn't the end. Because the courtroom was only the beginning of what the evidence would do. 3 days later, I got a call from Special Agent Tina Morales. She introduced herself as part of a regional financial crimes bureau. Calm voice, sharp questions, no time for nonsense. She reviewed Caroline's package. She asked me about the withdrawals. She asked me about Dorothy's vulnerability. She asked me about Theodore's history. Then she said something that made me sit down. We've seen this pattern before, Tina said, not just with your grandmother. Meaning Theodore wasn't just a risk. He was a repeat offender. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Because once you have a forged notarization, you don't just have family drama. You have a line crossed that the system takes seriously. Daisy and Theodore were interviewed. Then audited. Then subpoenaed. Then finally arrested. Merlin cooperated fully. She handed over old texts, emails, anything that showed coercion and planning. She looked sick with guilt while doing it, like she didn't know how to live in a world where she wasn't obeying her father. I didn't forgive her immediately. But I didn't punish her either. Because some people don't become brave until they're forced to choose between truth and survival. And Merlin chose truth. Months later, a judge ordered restitution. Accounts were examined. Assets were liquidated. Theodore's businesses were seized through civil process. Not dramatic, not violent, just the quiet dismantling of a life built on taking from people who couldn't fight back. Daisy wrote me a letter from detention. Caroline read it first. 6 pages of excuses, self-pity, and rewriting history. Not one real apology. Caroline asked if I wanted to respond. I said no. Some conversations are just traps in sentence form. My employer reinstated me after the hearing, and Harold apologized in his own stiff way. I should have known, he said. I wanted to tell him the truth, that nobody knows when a mother is trying to destroy you because the idea is too ugly to accept quickly. But I just nodded. I didn't need validation. I needed my life back. Cameron and I went to Eau Claire a few weekends later. We sat on Dorothy's porch with coffee the way she used to. The house felt quieter now, not haunted, just emptied of the person who made it warm. I told Cameron something I hadn't said out loud before. She was ashamed, I said, holding Dorothy's journal. She thought being tricked made her weak. Cameron shook his head. She wasn't weak, she was human. And that was the moment I realized something important. Daisy didn't just steal money. She stole Dorothy's peace. And the best revenge I could ever get wasn't watching Daisy lose. It was making sure Dorothy's truth was known. Because predators thrive in silence. And Dorothy, quiet, careful Dorothy, left me a voice made of paper. A year after everything settled, Cameron proposed. No fancy place, no brand-name restaurant, just a quiet moment in a familiar spot, the kind Dorothy would have loved because it wasn't about performance. I said yes, and I wore Dorothy's pearl earrings again, not because Daisy tried to claim them, but because they belonged to the life Dorothy gave me. And here's what I learned, the lesson I want you to take with you. Some people think revenge has to be loud to be real. But the most final revenge is the kind that doesn't break you. The kind that doesn't turn you into the thing you hate. the kind that uses truth like a blade and evidence like armor. My mother thought I was weak because I didn't scream back. She thought I was broken because I didn't beg for approval. She thought she could erase me the way she did when I was 14. She forgot I was raised by a woman who kept receipts. If you've ever been underestimated, manipulated, or painted as too emotional to be believed, remember this. Stay calm, document everything, tell the truth at the right time. Because the right evidence in the right moment can end a liar's story forever. If this story hit you somewhere personal, leave a comment and tell me what you think justice should look like in a family betrayal like this. And if you want more emotional revenge stories where consequences win without crossing the line, please like the video, subscribe, and keep watching.